You have a message that needs to get out into the world. Whether you are scared to talk about it, whether you don't know what to do to get it out there, or whether you just need some pointers, I think that this episode might be just what you need to take yourself to the next level, baby. We're talking today with Jason Cercone all about podcasting. Whether you want to be a podcast guest or a podcast host, he has some tangible tips to help you get that message out and to broaden your audience and broaden your platform to grow your empire. Okay, let's go.
Welcome to the Flourishing Entrepreneur Podcast with Alea Harris. This is the place where you and your fellow empire-building entrepreneurs come to vanquish the burnout monster and boost your glow and cash flow with energy alignment techniques and tried and true marketing strategies. Since 7 figures won't get itself, hit that subscribe button and never miss out on your chance to skyrocket profits, tap into your intuition, and manifest your dreams. And now, your host, Powerhouse StoryBrand Certified Guide, award-winning marketer, bioenergetic business coach, and Japanese whiskey lover, Alea Harris.
Often, getting your message out can feel a little intimidating. Even if you have no problem speaking and you're a big ol' extrovert, where do you start? And where are the people that will listen to you? Well, when I first started podcasting, I wasn't sure either, but there are certain things that helped me. I got clear on my message, which involved writing down who I was and what I wanted to talk about and how to relate that to my business and services. But before I could sit down and do that, I had to get clearer on who I was inside. What is it that I was uniquely trying to bring, and was it for the highest good of all concerned? So I encourage you, before you go out to share a message, make sure you know exactly what it is and how it can help people, and then in turn, how it can make you money. One of the biggest kind of things that I disagree with, I won't say that it's a bad thing, but I disagree with people talking on podcasts and speaking on stages just to feed their ego. Well, why do you want to speak on stage? Well, I just want to be on stage. That does a couple of things. One, your message is not necessarily going to come from a place of service because you're up there for yourself. And you're not really up there to help other people and then in turn have them pay you to help them further. You also will find that there are moments of lackluster feeling when you're talking on a podcast or when you're speaking on a stage. Not everything is a slam dunk. So after you define your message, make sure that you are putting it out into the world for the right reasons. It's not just because you want to hear the sound of your own voice. And then once you do get rolling, realize that your first podcast booking is a big win. Your first speaking engagement booking, paid or unpaid, is a big win. Every step on your journey that you take to intentionally get to your goal and develop as a human being and as a spirit having a human experience, every single step is a big win. So celebrate that win. Today's mantra is in line with that. It is, my small wins are huge. My small wins are huge. Say it with me. My small wins are huge. My small wins are huge. If you are saying, oh, how could I possibly just start with episode 1 of my podcast? Oh my gosh, everybody else is on episode 100, 200. They all had episode 1 too. How can I possibly start my email list? I have to start with 1 subscriber. People are talking about email lists of thousands of people. All of those started with 1 subscriber. Start small. Start small to start big. realize that consistency is the key to moving forward, not some big magical boom win right off the bat. Just stay consistent, keep true to your goals, keep true to yourself, and remember above all that your small wins are huge. Jason Cercone knows exactly what I'm talking about. He's a creative professional strategist, podcaster, and all around well adjusted bon vivant, making his residence in Pittsburgh, PA. He's the founder of Cercone Consulting, through which he helps brands and professionals get booked as guests on top ranked podcasts and leverage the authority building power of the podcast platform. He also is, doing what he preaches, and he's the top host of his own two podcasts, The Evolution of Brand and Pod Theory. So this is a podcast expert. If you wanted to know what do I need to do to start a podcast or to start being a podcast guest and make it actually make sense for my business, then Jason is the answer to your questions. And I'm so glad that we get to talk to him. Let's dive into the conversation now.
This episode is brought to you by Strategy by Flourish Marketing. Most entrepreneurs are too close to their business to clearly communicate how they add value and stand out from the competition. Sometimes they even struggle to say what they do and offer. If you're confused, then your potential clients are confused, and confusion is a profit killer. That's why Flourish Marketing uses StoryBrand as the foundation for our products and services. The StoryBrand framework helps companies understand what their customers are looking for and how to position themselves to get those customers to pay attention. If you'd like help creating clear brand messaging for your marketing collateral, head to www.flourishmarketing.co/strategy and schedule a call today. You have only confusion to lose and money to gain. Visit www.flourishmarketing.co/strategy to get started.
Hey there, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Flourishing Entrepreneur Podcast. How are you today?
Alea, I am great. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan. I'm excited to talk with you today.
I'm excited to have you. This episode is a little meta because you are a podcast PR person, and here we are doing a podcast that is also PR for you. I mean, it's kind of a beautiful synchronicity situation that's happening.
Life comes full circle. I love it.
So before we dive in further, why don't we tell the people who you are and what you do, including the podcast PR piece?
I would love to. My name is Jason Cercone. I have been doing podcasting since 2015, been doing either my own shows or helping others produce their own shows. Over the past year and a half, I started shifting to the podcast guest marketing side and helping professionals and entrepreneurs, basically anybody that's looking to amplify their brand message. I like to help them find the right shows that align with their mission and their message. If you go on a series of podcasts that aren't relative to your brand, it doesn't serve you. And it's very hard to get results. There is not a ton of crossover appeal in the podcasting world. So I like to help entrepreneurs and professionals find the shows that they can make an impact on. And when the audience hears them, they say, wow, I love that message and I want more from that person. So they seek them out and look to do business with them, look to stay in their circle of influence, buy their book, listen to their podcast, whatever their mission happens to be.
I love that because I have found podcasting to be an incredibly powerful tool myself. I've been a guest on over 100 different other podcasts, which made me be like, I really want to start my own. And it's been an amazing experience so far. It really is kind of like personal business coaching is really how it's turned out, with all of the amazing guests and then the different types of episodes we have. So podcasting is incredibly powerful. Before we get into our main questions, there's an objection that I heard the other day that I know that you're going to have a good answer to. It's, why should I try to get on podcasts when there are so many of them? Will anybody ever hear me?
Yeah, probably should just throw in the towel if that's going to be your mentality. Here's the reality of the situation we're in with podcasting. Yes, there's 2.5 million. By the time I finish this sentence, we may break 3 million. It's crazy. The growth is pretty out of control, and it's because so many people are seeing the value in this medium. So celebrities, politicians, actors, authors, athletes, you name it, even fictional characters, they're all starting podcasts. And because there's a great mission, or I'm sorry, there's a great message to be told and a great story to be told. So, with how many podcasts out there, that's a big number, right? In reality, there's probably a fraction of that that are still producing content on a regular basis. So right there, you've shaved something off of that big number that might seem intimidating. Now, and this is, I'm sure, something we'll talk about more, and I touched on this briefly. When you're finding the right podcasts, it's not about the big number, it's about zeroing in on your space and your niche. That cuts the number down again. So if you can get super granular with your efforts, of course it makes sense to go on other podcasts because people in your space are going to be looking for podcasts that are relevant to them. Therefore, you can make a big impact if you're on the right shows. But yeah, like if you're in marketing and you go on oh geez, what's like a techno funk rock music appreciation podcast, your message may not be heard and you may be a little bit lost, but finding the right show can make a tremendous impact and allow you to provide a lot of value to the audience.
I love that. Go big by going small,
Bingo.
niche down, understand your message, understand who you're talking to, and then go where you're hanging out. This is marketing 101 here, people. This is how marketing works. But I will tell you, I've done that and I had great results, right? So I'm not actually negating it, but I was freaking exhausted, Jason. Like speaking on 100 podcasts, that's 100 hours, right? Worth of time or more if that podcast required some type of prep in advance. And so I have, me and the burnout monster have this like dance that goes on, right? We tango, we waltz, we do the cha-cha, and I try to not go down and I'm always trying to break up with my dancing partner, but somehow I tend to find my way back there with the burnout monster. Doing 100 podcast episodes, I think in a span of 9 months, something like that. Yeah, we were trying to win a dancing competition together, me and the burnout monster. Am I
Podcasting with the
doing that?
stars. I love it.
Dancing with the Stars. We were the next contestants on Dancing with the Stars. So I know what you're saying to go small, but even when you go small, you still have a lot of options.
Mhm.
So, what would you recommend to people to avoid burnout and stay in alignment personally and professionally when they're trying to get their message out to the world?
Well, I say the first thing you need to do is manage your expectations. And I'm big on planning, not just with podcast guest marketing, but with everything. Like if you see my calendar, you'd say, okay, this is either the work of a psychotic or a very optimized person who understands what he needs to do to get through his day. I prefer to call it the latter.
I was going to say, I think that the latter is a healthier perspective to take.
Absolutely. So when you've decided that podcast guest marketing is how you want to amplify your message and how you want to bring new people into your circle that you can nurture and turn into customers and brand advocates, you have to make sure that you're doing it in a way that doesn't burn you out. Because the cool thing, this is me, and I'm sure Alea, you can relate. Going on other podcasts is a lot of fun. It's fun to just go have great conversations with people. And at the same time, you're talking to the whole audience at the same time. But when you really get down to the core of this is just you and me rapping. We're having a good time doing this. So if you put yourself in a position where you wake up and go, I've got 5 interviews I've got to do today, and I got to go talk to this person, and then like you're instantly going into it with the wrong attitude. That's going to project, and people are going to hear that and say, this person sucks. I don't want anything to do with them. Because again, you're looking at this as a vehicle that's going to bring people over to check out what else you can do to help them. And even if they're not in buying mode right now, if you impact them to the point where they say, yeah, I want to know more about this guy, and maybe when the time is right, I know that I can trust this person. If you don't get past that first step, and that's saying, oh man, I don't want to do this today, I'm approaching this with the wrong attitude, you're never going to get people there. So you have to manage expectations and start small. If you want to do one a week, one a month, do what's manageable for you. And if you know you have a busy week coming, don't schedule 10 interviews on top of it, because you're just going to be a miserable person that no one will want to be around and everything will suffer. So I think it's pretty much like everything else that you would do to manage your day, manage your week. Work this into it in a way that it's going to serve you and you're going to be excited to do it, because, again, end of the day, we're just having fun, having a great conversation.
I think one of the reasons why I ended up booking myself so much was a sense of unworthiness and a sense of not understanding my value. Here's how the narrative in my head went. No one's going to want to book me. So let me reach out to as many people as I can where my audience is hanging out. I mean, I'm still a marketer. I wasn't reaching out to the punk rock band or whatever it was you said, right? But I don't know if anybody's ever going to book me. I've never been on a podcast before. So I'm not like a sure thing. Let me reach out to, I was reaching out to maybe like 6 people or so a day. And I was getting booked by the majority of them. So at a certain point in time, I kind of hit critical mass and I underestimated the amount of energy outlet that it takes to be a quality guest on a podcast. It is a conversation, but you have to go in there with, what am I going to talk about? How do I make sure that this episode is the host's best episode they've ever had, and they're helping their people and they're running forward? And it is a lot. I wish I had this conversation with you before, Jason, and I had a more rational approach to booking my podcast guest spots, because I think that I would have been able to, really truly break up with my burnout monster dance partner instead. So you've given us some pro tips already, right? We were already like, I hope people are taking notes with the gems that are coming out of you. But I really want you to hone in to your craft right now, Jason. Getting people on those podcasts, hone it in, bring it in, give us the juicy, juicy goodness, but only 3 juicy bits of goodness. Some pro tips from your area of expertise that can help our empire builders scale their businesses while enjoying their entrepreneurial journey.
Well, when I relate all of that to podcast guest marketing and bringing this into your fold in regards to building your brand, I always preach preparation. And the term that I coined, and maybe someone else has said it before, but I had never heard it before I said it out loud and said, that sounds really good, is podcast guest optimization. You want to make sure that you're fully prepared before you do this. So being fully prepared is understanding what the podcast platform is all about. How can it serve you? What are the expectations you should have as you approach this platform and look to provide value to it and get value in return from it? Some people believe that one interview is going to change the world for them. While they may see some results over time, it's not enough. It's just the first step in the marathon. And it's never a sprint in this game, whether you're producing a podcast or being a guest on a podcast. You got to think about the long term. So that's why I always preach developing a plan, working that plan. And if you have to make tweaks along the way, so be it. But you want to make sure that you're fully optimized before you get out there and start doing the whole guest circuit. Now, Alea, I don't want this.
What does optimized mean exactly?
To me, I look at optimized as fully prepared.
Okay. So that's just, exactly who you are, your message, how that resonates with the message of the podcast you're going on. That's what you mean.
Yeah, it's a way of defining your value, but also understanding what your message is. When you get on these shows, you understand what you want to talk about. You know where, who you're speaking to. You've identified who your audience is. Alea, you said it perfectly when you were talking about your experience. You said that you started reaching out to 5 or 6 shows a day, and they were all responding to you in the positive, saying, yes, we want you on our show. So you may have underestimated your value to a degree.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know,
Most definitely did.
yeah,
Most definitely did.
the thing to remember about the podcast world is it's a very collaborative space, and the majority of podcasters are not professionals. They're not working for millions of dollars like someone like a Joe Rogan would be. So they're just human beings looking to have good conversations, and the impact you make by collaborating with them is going to help them grow. So when they see a person that's got some superior value, I could say like, Alea, I met you when I was producing one of my clients' podcasts, and I knew it just from producing that show. I'm like, damn, she's good. Like, I think she's got one hell of a message, and I think she can do a lot of great things in this
Why,
space
thank
for
you.
everyone. You're welcome. So I knew when I launched my show, you were a person I wanted to reach out to feature as a guest. So most podcasters are just looking for someone that can come on their show, talk to the audience for half an hour to an hour, leave an impact, make them feel warm and fuzzy, make them want to come back for the next episode. Because if this is the quality of guest that these guys are bringing in, you better believe I want to keep listening because this was great. So that's really what it's all about. So if you've got a message, you've got a background, you've got a story to tell, and who doesn't have that, you can go on a podcast and knock it out of the park. So I would say that would be step one. Step two, this one's important. When you present yourself to other podcasts, make sure you're doing it in a way that's meaningful. So many people just send this list of all the great things that are all about them and say, put me on your show. Well, why should I do that? You know, as a podcaster, I get some requests like that. Do something to stand out. What's making you valuable? You know, yeah, you have a laundry list of awesome things, but how do I know that aligns with the value that my audience is looking for? Have you listened to any of my episodes? Can you tell me one thing about something within my catalog that relates to you and how you could do something that matches that? If you haven't done that, then it's going to be tough because podcasters are getting lots of requests. They're going to take the ones that stand out. So be the one that stands out. And we'll talk about the guide that I put together that has some instruction on how to do that. But I'd say when you present yourself, don't spray and pray. Alea, I'm going to go back to your example again. You said you were reaching out to 6 shows a day. Now, the good news for you is you're very valuable. And obviously, you did something very good with that presentation you made because people wanted you. Some people don't do that. Like, this is always my favorite example. One of the podcasts I do is about podcast. It's called Pod Theory. It's all about podcast tips, strategies, things like that. Basically, talking to podcasters about best ways to start a show, maintain a show, and build their audience. Around 4th of July, I got an email from a guy that said, this time of year is really bad for dogs because they hate fireworks and that loud noise is just terrible. I'd love to come on your podcast and talk more about this.
First of all, that's just a random topic in general. I don't
Right.
know what podcast that would be on.
I know. Yeah, I mean, I would have to some of the dog lover podcasts or pet
Maybe.
care podcasts, that would be relevant.
Yeah.
I'd find it hard personally to build a format for that show, but that's just me. I'm not in that space, so I can't speak to it. But to come
But
on a
it
show that
definitely doesn't match your
not
podcast.
at all, not at all, and that's why I just laughed, and that one actually got sent around to some people like, "This is what we're talking about here. When this is the pitch you get, and this is the presentation you get." Brutal, brutal. Third step, third gem, third tip is more or less something that I apply to everything, and that's consistency. You have to make sure that you're consistent. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because I feel like I hear this on a lot of podcasts. It's a pillar for many people with their practices, but it applies here too. You have to be consistent with your approach. You can't just do one presentation one way and then never talk to that person again. You have to consistently follow up. When you go on shows, you have to consistently make an impact. You have to follow through on your word when you say you're going to share that interview with your audience, whether you're doing it through email, through LinkedIn, through whatever network you want. But ultimately, doing your entire campaign consistently is going to lead to results.
And I know people talk about consistency ad nauseum, but clearly
Mm,
people are still not understanding this. They're not being consistent.
right on.
Earlier in the episode, you were talking about how there's 2 billion, 2 million, a whole bunch of podcasts. But the actual consistent ones are the ones that stand out. Your podcast and even sometimes your marketing You don't even have to be the best out there. If you're just the one that keeps showing up, you will win heads above everyone else.
100%.
Like you said, Jason, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I also loved what you were talking about finding that value in what you offer. And it's kind of like a way to be prepared, understand your value, beat imposter syndrome before it gets started. Because a lot of people are like, well, who am I to talk on the podcast? And I was like, well, who are you? And they kind of stop at that question. They don't actually try to get the answer to develop a pitch for themselves that would make themselves a unique guest. I was also talking, I was at the time of this recording, I'm coming back from Nashville recording, teaching on the StoryBrand live stream. And I was talking to the StoryBrand folks about, so what do you look for like with your guests? Like, do you have to be like this super big name? And they're like, well, one podcast, we just have StoryBrand guides as guests right now. So that's a thing. But with other ones, maybe you have a name, but maybe you just have such a good topic that we just really want to talk to you. And then I thought to myself, I was purposely not going after some of the mid-tier and larger podcasts because I was like, well, I don't have a book yet. And I don't have, 20 million followers on Instagram. So those people aren't going to want to talk to me. And I had counted myself out. I had succumbed to that imposter syndrome. Whereas you were talking about earlier as well, getting your topic together. If you have a really good topic, most podcasters, even the ones that have a larger following, I have some clients who have 30,000 downloads a month, but that's not their main job. They're therapists or they are in construction. They're just really looking for value. And having someone that has a clean topic that's aligned with what they're talking about, you might be surprised on what kind of podcasts you can get on. I mean, do you find that is true?
Absolutely. Again, it's not always about the numbers. And I think that's where a lot of people get thrown off is on those vanity metrics. With social media, we look at the amount of followers and this, I actually just had this conversation in a thread on LinkedIn last night as we sit and record today about somebody talking about the whole million follower plague. And oh yeah, I've got over 1 million followers. But the gentleman that started the conversation was like, how many of those followers are actually serving you? How many of them are actually real? And that's where I chimed in and said, I still can't believe that line is being bought and sold because we know about all of these farms that you can buy into that will funnel a bunch of fake numbers into your system. You can do it with podcast downloads too. So if you think a download number is the most important metric, then you could do that. But what's the point? You're not getting anything from it. If people aren't actually hearing the content, who cares what the download number looks like? That's why anybody I talk to, it's all about providing value. And you can provide value on any show. It doesn't matter how big they are. And that's like I always say, if you could get on Joe Rogan, go on Joe Rogan's show. I mean, he's got a very broad audience, so don't expect it to change everything in your world. But it's a bit of an ego stroke to get on a show of that magnitude. But you can zero in more on the podcasts that are in your space, and the size of those audiences are going to vary from very small to moderate to large. But again, these are all things you can't control. What you can control is your narrative and your story and what you tell somebody when you go on that show. Because if you've got 5 people in front of you and you make an impact, that's great. If they were in front of you, literally, like you're sitting in a room with them, you're going to show up, you're going to turn it on just the same as you would if you were doing a presentation in front of a coliseum of 50,000 people. You're going to turn it on. You're going to show up for that audience. So as long as you're doing your part by showing up and providing value, you can't lose. And I think more podcast hosts are aware of that because they may get somebody that's a famous celebrity that's going on hundreds of shows just because they think it's what it is. That's what they're supposed to do. And they show up and they just sort of just go through the motions and just sleepwalk through it. And at the end, you don't really have anything great. And you're kind of sitting there like, well, they're big names. So I guess I got to still air this, but that really sucked. I hate that. So go on and just be a valuable resource. And you'll find every podcast host will want to have that in some way, shape, or form.
I love that. That's amazing advice. You did mention that downloads are not the metric, that they are akin to the follower count for social media, a vanity metric, one that does not tell me how much money is going to be in my pocketbook because of it, basically,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So, what are some of the metrics that we should pay attention to when we're trying to pitch on either side, when we're trying to pitch to be a podcast guest or if we're a podcast host ourselves? What are those metrics, or do metrics not matter in the podcasting world?
I don't look at metrics so much when I'm looking at getting people booked on podcasts. When I'm looking at shows for myself to go on, I don't look at metrics. I have a set of criteria, and I feel that, podcasts obviously are audible, but there's still an aesthetic appeal that's going to make a podcast stand out. So when you search for, let's just say you're searching marketing podcasts and you're doing this in the Apple Podcast app, you're going to get returned a bunch of different marketing podcasts. And as you're perusing that list of search results, the ones that are going to stand out are the ones that have really nice cover art, something that grabs you because we are aesthetic people. So when you see cover art that stands out, you might say, okay, cool, I'm going to click on this and see what's next. Does the show title have a cool name? If it's just like, here's my podcast, that's not creative. Like that, it doesn't tell me anything. But if someone's actually taking time to be creative with their name, there's another selling point for me. Then I'll look at the show's description. Can I learn what this show is about without having to listen to it? If they check that box off, then I usually look at ratings and reviews just to see what's there. And that will tell me, and I can also see in that same section how many episodes they do or they've done to that point. The only reason I look at that is because, especially for a client, if somebody's only done like 6 episodes, we don't know if they're fully in yet. Like they may fade away. They may not realize that podcasting is a lot of work. So I don't want to get somebody on a show that's going to die. And I don't want to do that myself. In the same vein, I do like starting with podcast or getting with podcasters that are just starting out, because if their show does take off, I'm a part of that initial run, and people are more than likely going to hear me in the very beginning when that show was just taking off. So when they go back in the catalog, there's me talking about what I do and how I can provide value to them. So that's always valuable. So as long as they're checking off those boxes, and then of course I listen to an episode, I listen to sound quality. I want to make sure that I would jive with that host, because some people, like you and I are fine. You don't interrupt me, I'm not interrupting you. I've been on podcasts where the host just can't shut up and they just jump right in when you're trying to say something. And I mean, I think the benefit here is that we're both podcasters, so we understand the 80-20 rule. Let your guest have some of the floor. Some podcasters don't get that. If you still see value in the show, you can go on there, but you're prepared, you're optimized, this is coming, so you can combat it to a degree. Or you can just say, that's not for me. I don't want to be interrupted. So focusing on those things versus metrics are much better, because the good thing about podcasts is they're evergreen. They're always growing. So you put a podcast episode out with somebody, and let's say our episode goes live tomorrow, right? It's live now. By the time I return this, it just went live today. This podcast could serve both of us for 5 years. Somebody could hear this 5 years from now and say, wow, that's really good. What are these people doing now? I want to get in on this. There's not a lot of mediums that do that. And that can't be gauged by a download number. And we said download numbers are skewed. If you're subscribed to a podcast, downloads happen automatically. The new podcast episodes will filter right into somebody's device. Doesn't mean they listen to it. So you can't put a lot of stock in that. So you can only put the stock in the value that you see and the value you can provide. And if those align, then you've got a good chance of making an impact and seeing some results.
That's incredibly insightful. And I think will also help a lot of people make better decisions on when they're looking at their own podcast, what success looks like, and when
Absolutely.
they're looking at getting on other podcasts, where to pitch and how to really filter through. Because if you're out there and you're just searching, it's like, woo, there's a lot of these suckers. Like, what should I do? And I'm a big fan of using your intuition. I love the cover art tip that you gave, because if you're scrolling through and that cover art makes you go, "Ooh, what's this?" It probably is a place that you could hang out well, right?
Mhm.
It's if you're
Mhm.
attracted to it, and if you are trying to attract your ideal client, most likely y'all are probably attracted to some of the similar things, and that could work well for you.
Right.
So, you've been doing this for a little while and you clearly are a pro. You clearly know what you're talking about. But just like any pro, we were not always pros. Everyone had a beginning, right? And so, what advice, knowing all of the expertise that you have now, what advice would you give to your past self, the version of you who existed about a year after starting either this business or your venturing into the podcast world?
Never start a podcast out of spite. I think
I
that
wait, what?
I was gonna say this is gonna be a very unique story. I don't
I'm
think
like,
this
can we get a backstory?
yeah, absolutely. So here's the deal. So back when I first got into podcasting, this was back in, I mean, this initially started in 2014. The show launched in 2015. I was working in the beer industry. I was big on craft beer. I started a craft beer advocacy blog that spiraled into a marketing business. I was working with some different bars and breweries and restaurants, and just it was a lot of fun. I was really having a blast with it. And I decided to launch this promotional network, and I was still pretty green and I was figuring it out as I went, but I had a good idea that I felt would be valuable. So I started launching it. And out of nowhere, just before it was about to go live, I did this little 2-week countdown of things to expect. And then, like, on the day it went live or the day before, I got a troll start trolling me on Twitter about how I was just not doing all this. You can't just do this and think you're going to help. Like, I'm like, who the hell are you? So I looked, and he had a beer podcast. And me and my best friend had been kicking around starting a podcast. We just couldn't land on what we really wanted to talk about. We were big into sports, so we thought maybe that would be good. We were big into pro wrestling at the time, so we thought maybe we'd go down that road. And nothing was really clicking, so we never did anything. And then when I saw this troll basically just urinating all over everything I was trying to do, I texted my friend. I go, I got it. We're doing a beer podcast. He goes, oh, cool. I love beer. Why do you want to do it? I'm like, I just do. We're doing this. We're going to put this guy in his place. Got mics. 2 weeks later, launched a beer podcast. It sucked. It was terrible.
Oh no.
And I mean, okay, and let me backtrack. It wasn't from a production quality, it was absolutely terrible. We didn't know how to edit. We didn't know anything about sound. We just turned the mic. The first one we did was in a noisy bar. Like, that's not listener experience worthy. Like, that's something I've learned over the years. So if I could go back in time and tell myself, like, dude, do it, start your podcast, but do it for the right reasons. Plan it out. Think about the long-term goal here. What do you want this to do? How do you want it to serve your brand? Don't just do it because some guy jumped on Twitter and made fun of you. And that was a younger man at the time, and just fully didn't. I think that was my first experience with trolling, and it sort of threw me for a loop. But in the grand scheme of things, when I look at what that experience gave me, it gave me my start in podcasting. I realized very early that I loved it. I'm like, this is fun. And I did radio in college, and I hadn't done anything since. So I thought, like, this is a nice return to the mic. I'm really enjoying this. So that podcast ran for a couple years. I got to meet some really cool people doing it. And once that petered out, I started another show, and that didn't do so well. And I started a third show. And while I was doing that show, it was going okay, but I just started realizing, I'm like, I've been doing this for about 3 years now, and it's time to take it seriously. Like, if you're really going to run with this and do it right, you got to do this right. You can't just keep, there's obviously you've got some on the job experience now, but let's take some time to really learn this. So I canceled that show and I just stopped, and I started watching TV personalities, and I watched guys like Larry King and basically anybody that was doing interviews and newscasters. How are they delivering? How do they speak when they're on the microphone? I would listen to people on the radio, same thing. I dove deep into podcasts for the same reason, just listening to how they were producing shows, how they were speaking, how were they handling themselves. And when I got done, that was about a year and a half I did that. And then I said, all right, I think I'm ready to do this right. And the next show I launched was successful. And then I transferred over to the show that I have now, which is fairly new, but it's off to a great start. If I hadn't have taken the time to learn, then I don't think I would have gotten to where I am today. So my advice to myself 5-6 years ago would be start, but start for the right reasons.
I love that. I like that you started, but you still were successful. It was just a little bit of a
Yeah.
bumpy start with some learning needed in the middle. Okay, Jason, at this point in time, we've come to one of my favorite parts of the episode, which is the journal prompt question. The journal prompt question for all of you listeners out there on the airwaves is the question that you can take away from this episode and use in your personal journal time to move yourself forward personally and professionally so you can flourish in business and in life. And Jason has lovingly volunteered to answer this question for you first. Jason, are you ready for your journal prompt question?
Bring it on.
Okay, the journal prompt question for this episode is, what is preventing me from getting my message out into the world?
I would say it is that mental block that tells you that no one wants to hear it. And it's the imposter syndrome that you brought up earlier, Alea. It's so easy to say, "Oh my gosh, this is the greatest idea ever, and I really think this would get over," and then immediately say, but who really is gonna benefit from this?" I equate a lot of this to my podcast, and to give it a quick plug, Evolution of Brand, you will hear Alea's lovely voice on there as well. And when I started that show, it was just sort of a combination of everything I've been doing over 6 years in podcasting and 6 years in marketing and business for myself. And I wanted it to be special. I had a very specific vision for how I wanted to carry that show out. But as I started doing interviews, I started having these conversations with people, I realized if I get one person to listen to this show and it's me, I win. I'm getting to meet some unbelievable people, have some incredible conversations. A couple of those conversations have led to business opportunities. And I mean, the show's only, and that was before the show even went live. That's a huge win. And I think that type of thinking overall will get you over that hump of saying that no one wants to hear your message. So if you're in that period of time, because we're all there, we're all stuck in that at some point in time where we've got that block saying no one cares, no one wants to hear you, just shut up and go back to your Netflix binge. If you want to overcome that, start thinking on that level of all value all the time, no matter what I'm doing, there's something valuable to be found in this. And when you start realizing that the value that you have that you can project to everyone, even if one person is impacted by that, you've done your job. You can go to bed knowing that you did something good that day. So think of it that way, and that's going to get you over that hurdle.
I love that. Jason, you have been a truly insightful guest. I hope those who have been thinking about getting their message out via the podcast world not only feel more equipped to do so, but they'll give you a call. And in fact, if people wanted to reach out to you, where can they find you? Where can they get that guide you mentioned? Please tell people how they can work with you.
I would love to connect with everybody. You can join me at bit.ly. Let me say that over. You can join me at bit.ly/flourishing entrepreneur. And there you can pick up my guide, 10 tips for becoming a valuable, fully optimized podcast guest. And you can connect with me on your favorite social media network. I look forward to talking with everybody soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jason. This was wonderful. And I do hope that people take advantage of that guide because podcasting and speaking and getting your message out into the world is one of the best ways to grow your empire. So thank you. I appreciate you for being a guest.
Thank you for having me, Alea. It's been a great time.
This episode is brought to you by Followers to Dollars Social Media Management by Flourish Marketing. Today is the day you stop stressing about social media. Instead of worrying about what to post, how to get more business from your Instagram account, or keeping up with the never-ending algorithm changes, outsource your social media to Flourish Marketing. Our team of expert copywriters uses the StoryBrand SB7 framework to create highly converting, strategic social media content that will grow your business. Plus, we schedule it for you so you don't have to lift a finger. Not only do we help create white space on your calendar by taking social media off your plate, but we also use data and analytics to get results. One of our clients, Tamari, said, "I've tried several other social media managers in the past, and Flourish Marketing has done the best at delivering real, on-brand, engaging content that my followers are responding to." If you want to join the ranks of our happy clientele, visit www.flourishmarketing.co/social-media and click Schedule a Call today. Did you know that it takes over 20 hours to produce a month's worth of winning content? Think about all the ways you could spend that time. Don't waste another moment. Reclaim your time by heading over to www.flourishmarketing.co/social-media right now.
Didn't Jason drop some amazing brain gems? He talked about managing expectations, starting small, being prepared, and I loved his phrase podcast guest optimization. Being fully prepared. That is podcast guest optimization. How can the platform serve me and how can I serve it? He also talked about being relevant. Don't just pitch willy-nilly and random. Pay attention to the podcast that you're presenting to and present yourself in a meaningful way. Make sure to include the so what for the host so that they understand the value that you add. He also gave some great advice about being consistent. And when you're trying to determine what podcast to be on, pay attention to the cover art, the show title, a clear description, ratings and reviews, and the number of episodes. Wow, lots of valuable advice. Above all, the main idea I got from Jason was just start. Start and be consistent. Have a plan. Don't just start willy-nilly, but just start. Your voice, your message needs to get out into the world. Every episode recorded is a win. Every guest star placement that you have is a win. Remember the mantra from this episode. My small wins are huge. And definitely being on a podcast is a huge deal. So I encourage you to celebrate not only that win, but all of your wins today and every day. All right, that's it for this episode of the Flourishing Entrepreneur Podcast. My name is Alea Harris, your host, and I will see you back here next Wednesday. We drop a new episode every single week. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything amazing. All right, until next time, I'm sending you lots of love, light, and abundance. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Flourishing Entrepreneur Podcast with Alea Harris. Dive into the show notes at www.flourishmarketing.co/podcast and connect with Alea at Flourishing Entrepreneur on Instagram. Vibing with what you hear? Leave a 5-star review to spread the love and be sure to click subscribe. From the entire Flourish Marketing team, we wish you love, light, and abundance. See you next time.